as I understand, like a little bit of the sociology or background there with the word Atari, it comes from a board game, I think, that they play in that's called Go, that they play in Japan, and it means on target or something like that in Japanese. So
Atari! We're live. Welcome listeners, gamers, non-gamers, PvEers, PvPers, and even NPCs. We don't discriminate. This is New Wave Gaming. I'm Ovox.
And I'm ChukTomahawk.
We're super happy to be here, and we're grateful for you tuning in to listen to our 8th episode. Well, before we get started, we'd like to invite you to follow us on our social media. Shoot us an email if you like, if you want to reach out to us directly. Our Facebook is facebook.com/New Wave Gaming Podcast. And our email is ovoxandchuk@gmail.com. That's ovoxandchuk@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. It's the truth. Am I lying, Chuck?
No, I definitely would, for sure. Feedback is always interesting to look at, for sure.
Feedback is interesting to look at. This is true. Any ideas for future episodes, we're open to hear those as well. And just hearing out from the fans and seeing the love, we really appreciate that. Depending on what app you listen to or what platform you get your podcasts on, definitely show us some love there if you like the content. 5 stars, reviews, likes, however that may manifest, we really appreciate it. And we'll definitely shout you out here on the podcast, even if it's a horrible review. Even if you're tearing us what they call a new one.
That's right.
Is that what they say, Chuck T, on the streets? Even if you want to tear us a new one, we'll shout you out. As long as it's 5 stars, as long as it's like a good rating, maybe not a good review, we'll shout you out.
Yeah, I could use another hole or two, I'm sure. God knows I've worn these out.
Whew, okay. So, yeah, this is a hugely important episode, I think. And of course, you're probably going to see it in the title. But I think it's fair to say that if you talk to someone out there, you just you know what? Wait until the episode's over, but go out onto the street and ask a random human what the first video game was. And there's a very likely chance that they'll be quick to respond, Atari. Hell, they might even say Atari 2600, which is really what we're going to dive into here on this episode.
Yeah, it's burnt right into the consciousness out there, I think.
Yeah, after some of our chats, especially for you, man. Especially for you. We're going to talk about a little bit of history. We're going to talk about why everyone remembers this console. We're going to talk about a few of the popular games, the most popular games. And I think Chuck T is going to inject this episode with some of his own nostalgia, experience, love for the console that is the old VCS, which was its original name. We'll soon hear, listen, and discover.
Yeah.
Man, I don't really have any gaming news or anything like that to bore our listeners with. So, I mean, if you want to jump right into this freaking amazing topic, all the news I got is I'm sucking at Warzone. I'm a little arced out, but I'm still enjoying it. And what else? You got something on here about Cult of the Lamb in the show notes, man. That made me a little nervous. Before we decided to hit record. Yeah. You want to explain yourself there, Tomahawk?
I feel like maybe I took a little bit of your Warzone XP and put it over on my side, and I'm coming up in Warzone, so watch out. But
he's gonna come down off the roofs of Rebirth Resurgence and just knock you out.
That's right. I got a 3080 Ti over here just humming like.
Oh,
yeah,
you do?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know you went that top shelf, man. That's above top shelf, isn't it?
Oh yeah, man.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's playing a video right now, I think, for itself, possibly.
Just for the fun.
I got like
just
six.
on the side playing Warzone while you're podcasting.
Yeah.
I'm just going to play this for the hell of it.
Yeah, it's like, hey.
That last session of Warzone, everyone, ChukTomahawk took us, carried the squad through for the win. We got the blue ribbon across the screen.
UGM.
Oh, is that what you're using?
Light machine gun is it's a melter. Like I didn't want to let the cat out of the bag too soon, but I keep in the lobby. I keep getting people they're just like, what was that? It's like they'll kind of get a couple shots in on me
from the death audio, the death thing,
the death chat,
yeah.
I'm having these experiences where people are shooting at me first, and I'm having to get lined up on them, but I'm still getting them, and then boy, that makes them mad.
Yeah. You'll get you'll hear the little ping from the kill, and then you'll just hear a guy come through the mic going, "What?"
Yeah, that was it, and they're like, "What gun is that?" And then you're like, "Yeah, it's the UGM." Kind of hit that little button where it turns it sideways so you can look at it.
Oh yeah, right after, yeah, just so they can see it in the replay, in the kill cam.
Yeah, but no, it seemed like we let Warzone rest for a little bit there and didn't play a ton. Still been arcing it up and a little bit of Forest on the weekend. So
I really like the Forest. There's something so satisfying about just nailing the zombie cannibal dudes with the crossbow and the compound bow. It's so much fun.
It is a fun game, and we've had fun doing it. I like the way we're doing it too, where it's not something we do every day, but we kind of, when we have extra time, we've gotten on there and continued that saga. So that's been fun, and I did catch a couple little bit of gaming news I wanted to throw out there for folks that popped up on my radar. There was a game called Cult of the Lamb that I thought getting to be a cult leader and taking on other cults, it's a pretty indie game. I don't think this is going to be the next Warzone or anything like that, but
or the next Far Cry. It reminds me of Far Cry 5 when I read when you mentioned that it was you could be a cult leader or something.
And I want to say it got a little tongue-in-cheek type thing, like we're talking about funny looking cartoon characters here rather than scary
I see.
world. Yeah, so it's a little more that kind of thing. And saw something about a game called Rumbleverse that supposedly is a cross between a wrestling game and Fortnite. So that should be interesting.
That sounds like the DNA for a successful game right there. Because Fortnite, that speaks for itself. And then wrestling, I don't know, there might be something there.
There was a coin-op wrestling game that I loved as a kid that I want to say was called Pro Wrestling, but I can't swear to that. It was at our local arcade. And there's something about that cartoon wrestling. In this particular game I'm talking about, you could get a chair and beat the guy over the head. And,
on
all
a
the
coin-op?
stuff on the stuff you could see, from on... Used to Saturday morning had a lot of wrestling, as a kid with the cartoons. So I'm excited to see that one. And, I threw this one in there just because it kind of relates to our topic today, but I saw there's a Pac Man World Repack is coming out. And, that just kind of stuck out to me as wow, that game has lasted so long. And
Pac Man.
I thought maybe
legendary.
If we get back to it here in a bit, I'd love to maybe examine why is that so popular? But
well, it is a good segue. It is a good segue, and we've welcomed our awesome listeners. We've told them what they can expect in this important episode, and it's definitely one that they're not gonna want to miss. You're not gonna want to miss this episode, fellow gamers, non-gamers. But it is a good segue, and you mentioned coin-op. What's up with that? What's coin-op? Chuck T, lay it on us. What's your best understanding of, quote unquote, the coin-op division of gaming or sector?
Yeah, I see this journey of sorts where you had engineers that were creating games and kind of doing some things for themselves, and then you had sort of a development of like a machine that housed a TV screen, an ability to have coins go through it and would allow you to play this game. And I think they put some things in the games like time limits and things that sort of kept that ball rolling so somebody wouldn't just, man the game up and be on there all day. And it kind of was a monetizing of this technology in my opinion. I think a lot of that ship had sailed before I was born, and obviously I've done a little research and going back into it and that kind of thing. But where it manifested itself for me was a place called Charlie's in our little hometown, and
I love it.
We would go to Charlie's and it had a grill in there that made burgers and stuff, and my parents would drop me off there with a roll of quarters, and you would spend the day there, and a lot of these
so
titles.
Much fun.
Yeah. And so that planted that seed, like I think like even that.
I don't want to stop you real quick, Chuck, but just out of curiosity, how many arcade boxes or games effectively were in Charlie's? Was it just a couple, 2 or 3?
I'm going to say around 15.
Damn.
Or so.
So Charlie's had a proper arcade room then. They had like a separate, was it like a restaurant with its own kind of like separate room to the side where you could kind of like walk in and they were just lined with arcade boxes, kind of a scene?
It went through 2 locations in its existence, and in the first one, which is the one that I went to as a kid, had about a 10 by 15 room, I would say, that was completely, the sides were lined with games, and there were probably two I can almost take you around the room, like just from my memories, like Tempest was kind of on the left when you came in, Frogger was next. There was a pinball machine, I think, beside Frogger. Then you had, it gets a little fuzzy from there. I know Dragon's Lair was in there at some point, which is a later release. Like it was sort of the fancy game that cost 50 cents. Like eventually, I want to say Defender was in this same arcade. You had Donkey Kong.
Man.
You had all the classics were certainly there. And
so just tying it in full circle, coin ops are arcade games, the big box arcade games, right? I mean,
right.
And you can still see these today. They're few and far between, but like I know if I go up to La Paz, and I go hit up the Soriana or Chedraui, they still got that video game section there, with some arcade games. With some box arcade games, but you're just
couple claw machines or something.
Yeah, there's
these
like
days.
2, 3, maybe 4 kids in there, versus like back even I got to experience this. There was a time where going to the mall was really going to the arcade. That's like all we were really like food court arcade.
Wow.
Food court arcade. And at the mall, they would have full on like floors or sections that were just gigantic rooms of coin op. Just these arcade games, man. And it was always a thing like, well, you know what? I got this roll of quarters, so I'm going to use half of it to play these 25-cent games. I'm sure they were a lot cheaper. I'm sure they were less, I'm sure it was not 25 cents, but much less probably in the 70s and 80s. But when I experienced the arcade thing, which was pretty much right there towards the end, unless you were like balling, or you had rich parents or something, you'd go in and you'd be allocating those quarters very cautiously. You want to put the majority of those quarters into 25-cent arcade games and just have long time horizon fun. And then once you were starting to run low on quarters, or you knew mom and dad were coming to pick you up soon, you'd go and spend the rest of them in those like $1 games or those 50-cent games or 75-cent games that took 2, 3, 4 quarters. And those were like that was like the dessert. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. What life lessons, we had to learn, like budgeting that out. Because who wants to be that kid that's like having to watch everyone else? Like toward if you've let your quarters go too fast. And
Yeah.
I agree. For us, that game was the Dragon's Lair. It was 50 cents, and it ate those quarters up quick, boy. And you were gone, and you also had to eat while you were there on this money, that I had. And I would say a burger was probably like 75 cents or something, so it wasn't anything crazy. But
it's budgeted funds, man. You gotta be careful. Mom ain't coming back until 1-2 o'clock in the afternoon.
And I have to admit, I do love video games. Like here we said on a video game podcast, but I also love cheeseburgers as well. Especially as a kid.
Chocolate milkshakes. And
so
Matt,
it was a tight race. Yeah.
Great memories. But this isn't a coin-op arcade episode. I'm sure we will have to go back and have a dedicated episode to the box-style arcade games. Matter of fact, not to go down the rabbit hole deeper and digress, but I was just talking to my dad this morning. I was telling him we were about to record, and he's like, "You know what?" And I knew this, but I had forgotten that he had told me about it. He's like, "Matter of fact, I used to work back in I think he said in El Cajon in California, one of those cities. But he used to work at Cinematronic, which was the company that made Space War, which was." I don't know if it was one of the first, but Cinematronic released the Space War coin box arcade, just a big box with a screen in it. Back in 1977, Cinematronic released that, and he used to work there with them.
No kidding.
Yeah, man.
at the place that manufactured,
where they manufactured the arcade systems for that game.
No kidding.
Yeah, man. And so we definitely got to have an episode on coin op. But this is the cool thing is that, and I kind of stole your momentum there, but you can take it off from here. But wasn't this kind of like the thing is that these game developers and engineers were like, yo, how do we take it out of these establishments, which is very commercial, where the manufacturers of the games, the developers of the games, they'll sell so many thousands of units to so many restaurants or establishments where they do arcade games, coin ops, and they're saying, hey, how do we take this and get it into the household?
Yeah, I definitely, I agree. This could be its own episode, and we don't want to, kind of bore our listeners with the, too much background of this. But what I want to just kind of paint this frame, where you had something that cost like a quarter to play, and you'd been exposed to it, that you liked it, and then once it was marketed to you that you can have this at home, this is going to cost a few $100s, which really broke the bank back then. You're talking, in today's dollars, like $800-900 that you're paying for this console, but you've got free video games from now on. You're playing all you want at home, and the boxes and the advertisement certainly made it out that it was going to be just as good as the arcade, and the reality was it was maybe a little different than that. But yeah, I just want our listeners to understand that we got introduced to these things at the arcade, we kind of saw the potential, and then suddenly, these guys are I think continually looking for ways to monetize this thing and make it, into the industry that it can become. So, that's sort of the framework. And then all of a sudden you see a commercial that says, we've got 100 games, including that Frogger game that you love at the arcade that you've spent, a good $100 in quarters on already. It's coming home, and that's exciting.
So exactly. And from what I researched, and I had to really put my head into the books with this one. Matter of fact, I felt like I wasn't even prepared because I just wasn't around when this stuff was happening. You had hands-on experience. So in researching this, looks like we got this feller, Bushnell, Nolan Bushnell, I think his name was, is. And him and his, I think he had teammates, but he really spearheaded the deal. He goes and forms Atari Inc., I think it was, incorporated. He forms Atari in 1972. And, I think by that time we had this coin-operated thing going. But I think Nolan, what he's like, hey, we got to get this going in the home, and they created a Pong, I believe, on what they called Atari Pong, and you could take it home. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if it was the very first console. I really don't. But I know that they released that, but it only had one game on it. It was Pong. So I think that right there is a huge leap in itself, just that accomplishment of taking what was exclusive to arcades and restaurants and pizzerias and et cetera and all that, and now creating a device that you could take home and plug into your TV and play Pong. And I think that happened right there in that 1972 range. I'm not 100% sure. No, it was in 1975, I think. It says the completion along with other missteps by Atari okay, no, that's different. By 1975, Atari had released a Pong home console competing against Magnavox. That's right. I think Magnavox had the very first home console. So by 1974, they had
Odyssey.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, man. Did you ever see one of those?
Actually, one of my friends had one, and I actually had a friend that had. I don't necessarily remember it being branded by Atari, but he definitely had a system that only played Pong, and I remember going over. Yeah, it had to be, and I remember going over to his house and getting some Pong on.
When you got the Atari, did you go over and tell him that it's not a Magnavox, it's a Magnasuck? I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. What do I know? Like, man, Magnavox, you gotta check out this Atari, baby.
Oh yeah, yeah. Hey, welcome to the upper middle class. Like,
VCS tattooed across your forearm.
Yeah.
Oh goodness.
Atari shirt. No, not exactly like that, but yeah, it definitely was a step up in this world, for sure.
Yeah. So I think what happened was they had some success with that thing, but there were limitations, engineering limitations. I think what they called it a logic system, where things were very limited in terms of what kind of memory and rapid access, RAM, ROM, all those types of technological nuances that we're certainly not experts in, FYI listeners, obviously. But I think what they were looking at with this is like, we're making good money here, but what if we create a home console where we sell the console cheap and can continue to make revenue with individual games that can be placed into the system, so that it's not just one game on the console. I could have probably explained that in a much better fashion, but I think you know what I'm saying. Like, they had consoles that would only have one game on them, like the Atari Pong home console. They said, no, let's create something where we can continue to sell games, enabling our creative developers to continue to program new games, and then they don't have to just buy a new console every time a game comes out. They can replace they can put in ROM cartridges with its own programming and games on there. Mm-hmm. That right there, you got the console factor. Hey, here's this new thing called a console where you can play it on screen at home, and then their forward thinking was, let's create a console with cartridges, which is what became the Atari VCS, later rebranded Atari 2600. Did that mean anything for you? What was that? Can you say anything to that? Like, that particular aspect? Like, what? Cartridges?
Like the perspective as a kid, I don't, necessarily remember that. Like I think it was so new that, just whatever it showed that needed doing, we just kind of took it at face value, kind of like when you hand a baby an iPhone today, they just start scrolling. It seems like, or not necessarily a baby, but a toddler, like someone. It's amazing to me how much youngsters take to technology. So I don't know that it registered like that, but I see.
Do you mean like, sorry for jumping in on you, but like, do you mean in a way that like, it didn't faze you, or that everything that they were doing was mind-blowing. And that particular aspect wasn't any more mind-blowing than the fact that there was a console in the first place. Like, was it just like...
I think, the second, but do recognize that there were 8-track tapes and things like that resembled this. And I think, honestly, like, I see them, like, as they're trying to figure out how to mass produce this and mass market this, they're almost like trying to use a model of like, say, a record player, like the console's like a record player, and they want you to be buying records from now on.
Okay.
And that's not exactly how it went. Like I can take a record player from 50 years ago and use it today, but consoles, like, get upgraded almost every 6 months, at least every 2-3 years we get a new console. And I think they wanted to make one Atari and us be using it still today, possibly, just with new cartridges. And that wasn't how that exactly went for him. And it was such a new thing, like monetizing this. It didn't, the path wasn't really clear.
I feel like there were no clear paths for anyone at this time. I mean, this was a brand new industry. It was brand new in terms of, in all of its sectors, it seems like, based off what I've read. I mean, it's brand new industry with the developers and the creators and the programmers. They're like, this was all fascinating stuff for them. I think they were just like, computer tech was, heck, I think some of them thought that they had even missed the bus already, but it was really just in its beginning, Go ahead. Sorry.
I think we have hindsight now that we know that this continues today. And I mean, here we are making a podcast about it, but at the time it could have just been like, say, the hula hoop or the Frisbee or things that were popular and, sold a few, but it's not exactly, a billion-dollar industry.
Well, and as you mentioned, they had they had ups and downs, Atari. But going back to the early mid 70s. So they released the PONG deal, the home PONG system, which just had one game on it. I think it had like, one paddle or whatever, something like that. And it was looked like a very small device. They come up with the cartridge thing. They want to do that. I think Nolan Bushnell was like, we need to do this. But I don't think they had the funds in order. Like, they wanted to release it, I think, much earlier than they ended up doing. They ended up releasing the Atari 2600 in 1977. They wanted to do it way before that. They were having issues. They didn't have the funds. So, as I learned from you, Chuck, they were purchased. They were purchased by Warner Communications, thereby giving them that additional funds to get the development completed, the creation of the 2600, and they got it out. But they were beaten. They were beaten by Fairchild Channel F. I don't remember what year the Channel F came out, but that, technically speaking, was the very first cartridge exchangeable console home game system,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I do feel like you could almost say this is the moment where things sold out, like for the dollar in some ways. Like, I'm glad it did, because it would have never made it to East Tennessee, had they not,
I don't think it would have made it at all. He needed the money.
Yeah.
It looks like he needed that money to be able to launch the Atari 2600. And they were purchased by Warner Communications in 76, and in 77, Atari VCS was released.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah.
Yeah,
I think from that point on, you kind of see the hand of big business sort of, making critical big business type decisions that, support the shareholders and things like that, maybe aren't always for the best in quality. But it did get it out there and laid a framework that we're still working with. So.
Yeah. Let's get technical real quick. I want to read a description, something more profesh, from RetroGamesCollector.com. It's a great article here. Officially, it was called the Atari CX 2600 Heavy Sixer was its nickname. They called it the heavy sixer. I love that. Chuck, real quick, before I continue reading this, do you kind of want to describe its sexiness?
Well, I got 2 words for you. Wood grain.
Once again, like in episode 1, we're coming back with that wood grain. It's just dripping.
It's matching up with that floor model TV you got going on there, and yeah, it's got that drip. And one of the interesting things I found is we looked back at this, like all those switches, like I think they call this one the 6 because of the 6 switches possibly, and you've got a 4-switch model. I don't ever remember messing with those switches that much. Like, and as I went back and looked at them, you can change the difficulty of the game with those switches.
Mm-hmm. I know, isn't that nuts?
I feel like my evil sister might have came in and switched that switch. Because I saw, for example, in Adventure, it takes the mazes from invisible mazes to non-invisible mazes, and I only remember invisible mazes. Like,
dang.
Yeah.
Man.
Yeah.
So let's see here. I want to read off the specs for all of the techies that will like those specs. But where are you here? Having a meltdown. Quality podcasting right here, everyone. Yeah, so television. I got that stuck in my head from the first episode. The Atari 2600, technically speaking, is a second-generation console, proving that this certainly was not the first console, even though it's pretty much the first console that everyone remembers and thinks about. It's a CPU-based game logic, AI simulation, ROM cartridges, multi-screen play fields, simple sprites, color graphics, 1 to 4 bits, up to 3 audio channels. This is very generalized. We'll come to see that there were multiple variations of the Atari 2600. And just in contrast, the first generation consoles were discrete transistor-based digital game logic, meaning they didn't have CPU. Games were baked in, right? So you have it like we're going back to the PONG home console. PONG was the only game in that thing. That was it. Mm-hmm. Basic dots, lines, or blocks. Mostly black and white, single channel or no audio. So that's more of a comparison with the first generation than it is a description of the specs of the 2600. I'm going to bring those up, but I thought it was cool to kind of like to distinguish the huge leap from first generation to second generation with these cartridges. That's really the main thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's a huge selling point that, there's already hundreds of games available and we're going to make more. And, here's the outlet to do that. And, I think that was a brilliant move to go with the cartridges and allowed for the expansion and growth of it rather than, like how many games of Pong can you play?
Roger that. Me? 1. Yeah. Nowadays,
like,
1.
Missed it. Okay.
Oh.
It's 14 to 15.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah. So
real quick, let me activate a Google cheat code here. I'm going to read from a good old Wikipedia. The hardware, we got the Atari 2600's CPU is the MOS Technology 6507, a version of the 6502, running at 1.19 megahertz in the 2600. That's the console we're talking about. Though their internal silicon was identical, the 6507 was cheaper than the 6502 because it's the chips we're talking about, because its package included fewer memory address pins, 13 instead of 16. Now, if we go back to our Intellivision episode, we kind of touched on these things. We talked about the MOS chip, and not to rehash on all that, but the MOS chip was a huge advancement for the personal computers and which is what the Intellivision was, technically speaking, not a console. But it was for purposes of hardware, that chip really did bring something here to the Atari as well. And I think we should touch on that, maybe not now, but at some point. Sorry for all the background noise, folks. There's like biker gang going by. Can you hear that?
Sweet.
Damn. What was the name of that? What was the name of that biker series? Sons of
Anarchy.
Sons of Anarchy are rolling by down here. Los hijos de la anarquía passing by. Anyways, getting back at it.
What is it?
What was I saying? Shoot, I lost my train of thought here.
We're talking about the Moss chips.
Yeah, those chips were exact. Thank you, Chuck. Those chips were huge. So the console has 128 bytes of RAM, call stack, and the state of the game. And what? I don't know. Anyways, it has 128 bytes of RAM, so that's important to know. The top bezel of the console originally had 6 switches. Power, TV type selection, which was the color in black and white, game selection, player difficulty, and game reset. The difficulty switches were moved to the back of the bezel in later versions of the console. The back bezel also included the controller ports, TV output, and power input. Controllers were on the back. What's up with that?
See, yeah.
Did that ever piss you off?
To the max, like
What in the hell?
I do like. It's important to point out that they called that controller the joystick. I think like it definitely has a lot of joy, but the joy ends on the fact that it's got about a 2-foot cord on it. So, where do you put this thing? Like, the living room at that time for most people, I think, had a couch and a chair and that kind of thing, and this floor model TV. So this thing either had to sit on top of the TV or down in the floor in front of it. So the ergonomics of that were incredibly painful. Like you had to be pretty much laying on your stomach down there in front of the controller. I mean, like wireless was never heard of at this point. Like that's a pipe dream. You'll ever see that.
And this is like right in the middle of the time when our parents would always be telling us, "Don't sit that close to the television. It's gonna rot your eyes out."
Absolutely, yeah.
You remember hearing that as a kid?
Dude, I had a special problem with that I was born with like jacked up vision, and so I always sat right in front of the TV. I couldn't see it from anywhere else. Like that's how they figured out I needed glasses. Like you can't just, as a 1-year-old, you can't look at your parents and say, like, "Hey, I think
my vision's fucked up. I need glasses." Oh, he needs glasses.
Like, why is he sitting right in front of the TV for the last 3 years? But, that kind of came out that way. And that was kind of like I don't know. I think they thought it was going to melt your brain or something, like give you cancer possibly in the brain. But,
something like that.
They didn't want you up there around the TV. And I think they recognized that it was going to, I think that's where the wood grain comes from, is that it's going to be connected to this TV, but that's kind of it. And the TV was kind of designed to hook an antenna up back there, but it wasn't ready for this, situation at all. Like you had to kind of improvise and get that hooked up for yourself. And yeah, that's where it went down. You had your buddy over and you both get right down there in front of the TV. And
yeah,
I think like right at that same thought process, like your parents, I think they just saw trouble right away. Like my dad was like, "You kids need to get outside. Like, what are you doing over there?"
Oh man, see, this is what I meant earlier by it was just such a new thing for everyone. It was a new thing for programmers. They were learning what the capabilities were of this new computing world. It was a new thing for marketers because it was a new industry and they had to figure out how to market it. It was a new thing for legal teams to figure out licensing and how do we pay people for this? Where do they deserve credit or not deserve credit? Which was a huge thing we can touch on here about Activision. Remember that, Activision. It was a new thing for the kids that were like, "What? I can play video games at home?" This is all, it was the beginning of what we now know today as the gaming world, which is a billion? Is it million? Yeah. I don't know. Like it's a huge deal now. And it was also a new thing for parents. Because all of a sudden their kids, I was one of them, we weren't outside building tree forts anymore.
No, and yeah, I think it's probably important too to realize that their generation had really just gotten comfortable with the TV. I remember, say my grandfather thinking the TV was going to rot our brains out.
The devil.
And now, and you saw those commercials that said like, tonight, don't just watch TV, play TV. And it's like,
yes, exactly. That's exactly what I'm talking about, man. How do you respond to that as a little kid when you see that for the first time back then?
Well, I think maybe your parents had a second when they thought, "Oh, this is what my dad was worried about."
Yeah.
And my dad would call me a house cat. He was like, "Yeah, you're like a little house cat in here."
That's fucked
I'd have the air conditioner jacked up, and I'd have a little, I'd have it so cold in the house that I had like an Afghan or something. It's like 100 outside.
Just
Dad's
working
coming
that
in
joystick, man.
Dad's getting home from work. He's like, "What the hell?" Yeah, so it was new for everyone for sure, and just figuring out how it fit into our lives and where this where this went.
Yeah, before we keep going, because we're definitely going to cover a lot more of those nuances and that fun cultural stuff. I'm going to bore everyone with the specs and the factoids for another second. So, also known as the Atari VCS, prior to November 1982. It was in 1982 that it was branded the 2600, where that kind of became the name, and that was due to one of the variations. I think there's like 7. There might be more variations. I'm tempted to think, Chuck, that maybe you didn't have the original variation. Maybe you had one of the newer ones. But when it originally released in 1977, they released the Heavy Sixer, which is the main classic. After that, in 78, they released the Light Sixer, which is, it's a little bit lighter. It's thinner. It's still got the black. It's got the wood grain. 6 switches in the front. Moving a little bit down the road, in 1980, they released the Atari CX 2600-A, which looks like it was the last variant of the Woodies that had the wood grain. Mm-hmm. They wouldn't be doing that anymore after that. In 1982, they released the Atari 2600 all-black Darth Vader, which is pretty dope looking, man. At this point, they had taken the 2 of the 6 switches on the front and put them on the back. So there were only 4 switches now on the Atari. And this version's pretty badass, man, I gotta say. I'm looking at a picture of it right now. In 1986, they went and released the Junior. Cheap and cheerful, it says. It's got a rainbow going across the front. Looks pretty cool. And then in 1986, they released a new Junior, it looks like. Was it the same year? Maybe a new variation of it. And then the Junior Black, which was released, it looks like, only in Ireland. Interesting. Manufactured in Ireland. So there's a bunch of variations of this thing. It was originally released, again, in September of 1977 in North America and 1978 in Europe. And it wasn't released in France until 1982? No way. Interesting. Its total lifespan was from 1977 to 1992. The introductory price was $189.95. This is according to the Wikipedia page. I'm using a cheat code here. So let's just call it $190, which is equivalent to $850 in 2021 money. So yeah, Chuck, you were right on the money there, man. $850.
Dude, that's a lot of money.
Man,
and that's why I say it's important to understand that the frame and context here, where we were spending $10 a day at the arcade. So this you didn't point out to your parents that, hey, I'm still going to want to go to the arcade even though I've got this at home, but you did sell it like pretty much within a year of let's say if I go to the arcade every weekend and spend $10, this thing's going to pay for itself.
And I think it did for a lot of people, man. I mean, even though it was a rocky road, which we can kind of define a little bit better here in a moment, they went until January 1st of 1992. So year my brother was born. They sold 30 million units as of 2004.
Wow.
The media was the ROM cartridge. CPU, again, was the 8-bit MOS Technology 6507 chip at 1.19 megahertz. 128 bytes RAM memory. The graphics was they called it the TIA, or Television Interface Adapter. Controller input, joystick, paddles, driving, keypad, trackball. Trackball's pretty dope. I like that trackball.
Yeah.
Best-selling games, Pac Man, 8 million as of 1990. The predecessor was the Atari Home Pong, and the successor was the Atari 5200. That Home Pong thing was that one we were talking about earlier that only had the one game on it. Tiny little device.
Yeah, and I guess they didn't really start calling this one the 2600 till the 5200 come out, right? Like they sort of...
You might be hitting the nail on the head there. That may have been because the 2600 continued to be released even though other successors came out. So let me check T real quick when the Atari 5200 came out. It came out in 1982, and that was when they rebranded. Yes, you are 100% correct, my friend. Thank goodness for cheat codes.
Yeah.
Oh, speaking of which, this is completely off topic yet related. Just checking information and making sure we're doing our best to give you guys accurate info. In our last episode, when we were talking about John Romero and that he might be making a new game, I mistakenly mentioned, I think, that back in the day he had created a company called IP, but it wasn't IP, it was ID. So I made a brain fart there. Just wanted to mention that real quick while I remember it. Apologies for that mistake there. But anyways, moving on.
Yeah, that definitely.
I mean, hey,
I'm not sure I saw that.
Yeah. So those are the tech specs and factoids of this little device here. They had a bunch of different variations. I think it would have been painful, man. I mean, some people get frustrated with PlayStation and Xbox, PlayStation 4 and PlayStation Slim, PlayStation Pro. It's like, you know what, guys? There's just too many. Can you imagine there being like 7, 8, 9 of them bad boys? Not to mention all of the rip-offs and emulators and copycats that probably existed.
Yeah. I think there was no precedent, so you really didn't know, that there was going to be another, like say the next generation of consoles were coming, like this could just kind of be the end of it. And I want to say I owned that last wood grain model that came out in 1980. If I was going to guess, like as I look at all those models, the one that kind of stands out as what I remember is that one. So, I wasn't the first to have it. I again, things don't come super fast to East Tennessee back in those days. And by the time I convinced my parents, I'm sure that was about right, probably around 1980 or so. And, yeah, I think it's interesting. Like even before this research and that kind of thing, like if I were to just ask you, like, what do you think of when you hear the word Atari? Like what would you say?
When I think of the word Atari, I think of that scene in Terminator 2, I think it was, when, what was that kid's name, man? John...
Was it Sarah Connor's son?
Yeah, John Connor.
Yeah.
Yeah, remember when John Connor's like a young teen? I think it was, and he's in that mall, and there's a bunch of people playing video games. Do you remember that scene? I think that was in Terminator 2.
It's coming to me, yeah.
Yeah, there's like a scene where like the Terminator's going for him to the mall, and he's like in a video arcade, and he's in there just like there's people like I don't know why that scene comes to my mind when I hear the word Atari.
Yeah,
but
I have to say, no, go ahead. Please elaborate.
That comes to my mind. 80s music comes to my mind, synthwave comes to my mind, neon flashing lights, in a way, gaming comes to my mind. Atari brings a lot of feelings and nostalgia, and I didn't even really play that thing, man. I think I played it once or twice. I got my hands on one of the last variations of it, and by that point I had already played Nintendo and Super Nintendo, and it just didn't do anything for me. For me, it's more of a thing of respect. Like I recognize what the Atari means for the gaming world. So it's more of a like respect and props and honoring it
Yeah.
thing for me.
Yeah, if we were going to make a Mount Rushmore of video consoles or video game consoles, I feel like it'd have to be up there, kind of as one of the forefathers, for us. And
For home
I know
game consoles, yeah.
yeah, for sure. As I understand, like a little bit of the sociology or background there with the word Atari, it comes from a board game, I think, that they play in that's called Go, that they play in Japan, and it means on target or something like that in Japanese. So
Atari!
yeah, and actually the pillars, as I understand, the symbol is kind of like a representation of Mount Fuji, and the two little, it's kind of like the two angled pillars of that there are the two people playing, and the center line is to represent the playing field. Yeah, I found that pretty interesting. And that just when I hear the word, I almost immediately kind of see coin-op machines. Like I see that word on the side of maybe a centipede somewhere, like a centipede console or cabinet game. And I remember like kind of when I first saw it showing up on T-shirts, and I think that's it. And I think this just further led me to ask the question, an even more in-depth question is why is the Atari 2600 like sort of the console that everyone remembers, especially of a certain age?
So, Chuck, that is an awesome question. Why is the Atari 2600 the console that everyone remembers? Initial thoughts? I think we know the answer to this one.
I think in one word, I would say marketing.
Yep.
Yeah. Which I'm not sure I
Is that all you have to say?
How important it was. Yeah. Marketing.
Marketing.
Moving on.
Well, I think that is definitely the answer. It's marketing, but that marketing element didn't really come into Atari's environment, it seems like, until they hired on this guy by the name of Ray Kassar. And I might be mistaken, because Ray Kassar and Bushnell, is that his name? I already forgot the main guy's name. Nolan Bushnell. I think Bushnell was the one that hired him on in the first place, and it was those two that became so adversarial at the end. It was strange. I think he was the one to bring him on, and at the same time, they became very adversarial, and I don't think they ever, got along well. But anyways, so they hire on. Go ahead. Sorry.
And this is around the time period, like say they're trying to get the 2600 out, and they need the extra financing, so they make this deal where they sell out to Warner Communications. And,
and they bring on this guy.
Yeah, you've got. I think we think back to the things that Warner was managing. They're managing movies and movie stars and I think television. And
it's important you mention that, Chuck, because think about that. They're managing records, music, artists, and they're also very familiar with the environment around that industry.
Mm-hmm.
Be it distribution, be it licensing. This is the important one, licensing. They've already got a way of doing things. So then they go and buy Atari, which is a video game company, programming, etc., which is a completely different industry. So there's some dynamics there that are kind of like, I don't want to say maybe they're conflicting, but they certainly don't mix. And I think that maybe Warner expected them to just completely cross over without there being any issue. But
yeah, and I think they went about it in a way to ensure that they made the most money.
So answering that question, I think the answer is, and I'll try and summarize this the way I understood it, but they got bought by Warner, giving them enough money to release the 2600, to release the Atari VCS. It was initially released with, I think, like somewhere around 6 or 7 games. I don't remember the exact number. And those games were kind of like pulls or copies or inspiration. I don't remember, but like they were basically coin-op games that they had converted over to home console style on the VCS. And in its initial release in 1977, I think there towards the end of 1977, the initial release did quite well. You know, I think they released it there on Christmas, and the public, they had already played all these arcade games, these coin-op games, so they knew what they were going to be getting into. So with the initial release of those 7 or whatever games, it did okay, but the second wave of release of games didn't do as well. So that's really where Kazar ramped up the marketing deal for the following Christmas release. And this is also at the same time when Nolan and him were butting heads so much because they had disagreements in what was important for Atari to be focusing on. Mm-hmm. I think the brass of Warner and Kazar were like, no, we need to focus on only this VCS and the games that are there, and push the marketing hard, push the marketing. And I think Nolan's idea was, no, we need to already forget about this VCS thing and start working on the next tech, the next project. So there were pros and cons, in my opinion, to both of these ways of looking at it for Atari. But answering the question of why is the Atari 26 console the one that everyone remembers, it's got to be that marketing, man, because, I mean, you said it yourself a minute ago. What was the slogan?
What is it? I forget which one. The be innovative like you were last year.
No. You said it a moment ago. It was if you can't. What was it?
Oh yeah. Why simply watch TV when you can play TV? Yeah.
That's why I think it hit hard. You know, that's why, because good marketing is good marketing. So in a combination of that good marketing that Kazar was bringing in, with the release of some crucial checkpoint games, because there were a lot of bad games. There were a lot of games that did not do well. In fact, Atari had a lot of problems. They made a lot of units that never got sold. They made a lot of cartridges that never got sold. I think there was a cartridge there somewhere. I think it may have been Pong, actually. I don't remember exactly which game it was, but there were so many made that they had to take them and go put them in a landfill or somewhere in New Mexico or in the Mojave or something like that. Did you hear about that?
I did. I think ultimately, I want to say in the 90s, they went and dug that up and
and exposed
uncovered some of those. Yeah. I read that as well, as even though Pac Man sold as many as it did, they had actually predicted it would sell more and had made tons of these cartridges. And as I understand it cost them maybe $5-10 to make a cartridge, and they were selling them for either $20 to $40. So they still were winning, but they lost in that.
Yes,
they could have done way better if they hadn't made those unnecessary cartridges. And I certainly think you kind of led it up with the bringing the coin ops home. I think the popularity of those was one reason that this is the one that everyone remembers. But again, you're mentioning the folks there with Warner, that were savvy to this game of entertainment.
Absolutely. And this is so cool in my opinion, because I didn't know any of this stuff, man. I wasn't even sure how many Ataris there were, just hey, let's do the Atari. Great. Start learning all this stuff. And part of what we saw in the research here was, and I think this has a huge amount to do with the fact that Atari really cornered the market and got that popularity. What Nolan did, and I don't know the dynamics of this or from what moment forward or whatever, but going back to the MOS chip, apparently what he did is he created a bunch of side projects within Atari, wherein, of course, they would require contracts for chips. So what he did is he's like, you know what? I don't want anyone else to get chips from these people, because if they get chips, they will be able to create their own devices, their own consoles, their own whatnot. So he went and created I don't want to call them phantom projects, but just projects that weren't necessarily like the main focus, but they each had their own contracts. So those 5 or 6, maybe 7 laboratories in the world that created chips, they were tied up in these contracts, creating a de facto monopoly for Atari. So by doing that, by getting these contracts with these chips and getting basically let's call it 90% of the chips where no one else could, they weren't breaking any monopoly laws, but they were certainly inhabilitating these other companies out there to become competition, because they simply didn't have access to that technology. Only Atari did. So that was something very clever of Nolan, like that he did, and that really created a what's the right word? It just created an advantage for Atari that really put them out there where no one else could, because no one else had access to the technology to begin with, let alone, like, forget marketing. You know, there's great marketers out there. There's great distributors out there. But if you can't even get access to the what is it, meat and potatoes?
Right.
You're not going to be able to. So I think that had a huge factor. And one of the things that, when Nolan left in 78, I think he left towards the end of 78. Yes, he did. Or was it 79? I think he left towards the end of 78. Anyways, when he left, I think it was Kazar, who became the new CEO of Atari and all that, he went and canceled all of those projects. He's like, these projects don't make any sense. Why should we have them going if we're focused on the Atari 2600 and blah, 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 blah. So with literally, like the article said, with the swoosh of a pen, or, with a simple passing of the pen.
Stroke of, yeah.
That's it. This is what happens when you live in Mexico. You tend to forget English a little bit. With the stroke of a pen, he created like 3 or 4 competitors instantly. One of them, which was, guess who, Chuck?
Activision.
No, Intellivision.
Intellivision, yeah.
Because remember, we covered that. Intellivision got that chip, the MOS chip.
Once they got their hands on the MOS chips.
Let's go, boys. In 1979, they released the Intellivision. And that was because, these guys went and, because of everything that happened at Atari, man. It's fascinating.
It is fascinating. And I'm almost torn. It's like I'm glad that probably he did what he did to kind of, mass market this thing and get it out there and establish the console as a profitable, thing. But I'm wondering if it didn't, was there a developer out there that we never heard of that couldn't get their hands on the chips, that died on the vine, essentially, that we might, it might have been better, the best and brightest,
man.
Yeah.
Well, I completely see where you're coming from, and it is a fun thought experiment to go and be like, well, what if they hadn't let go of Bushnell? Because from all the articles I've seen, it's kind of hard to see whether he quit or was fired. It looks like he was fired. He was getting phased out, because his thoughts were, we need to improve the hardware. We need to keep these chips coming our way. We need to focus on creativeness and not be so corporate. And there was a lot of pros to that. And then we got the other side. We got the Warner Communications brass side, the Kazar side, which he clearly did great things for Atari to make tons of money. Was it tons of money in the short run and not the long run? That's also part of the thought experiment, Was it just a cash grab? Well, it kind of seems like it. But at the same time, part of this, and now we're kind of deviating away now from why the Atari is the console everyone remembers, but within this context of internal operations, there was also a bunch of developers that even after Nolan left, they would eventually decide to leave. Mm-hmm. And you were just touching on this. Do you want to?
Yeah,
you want to pull
that's
that
when
in?
the Activision sort of comes into play, and as I understand it,
yes, Activision, man. I had no idea.
Understand it, these folks felt like they were sort of being treated like simply as engineers rather than creators. And as I understand it, as a game was developed back then, you had one lead guy that was the main programmer for each game.
Isn't that nuts?
And they wouldn't even like put their name on the box. Like that's how, as I understand it, maybe our first Easter eggs got developed. I want to touch on that as we talk about a game later called Adventure. But as I understand these folks as creators, they felt sort of done wrong here, and they would, that once they had some successes with a game or two, like they didn't get like a bonus for that. Like suddenly they made millions of dollars for this company, and they still got paid the same thing. And I think when they confronted these folks about it, they told them that they pretty much were the equivalent of folks that were designing towels. Or something like that. And I think that certainly rubbed folks the wrong way, and was part of just the, having to crawl before you walk of a developing industry here. But we started realizing that these folks are part creator and part engineer. It's kind of it has to be two things, sort of, and as I kind of researched that, it sounded like they would have these brainstorming sessions, and ultimately these four guys that had made really good games and didn't really get any good dough for it finally decided they'd had enough, and they left and created Activision. And third party development was a brand new hammer thing there. But if you look then, like look at the games they create, it's got the guy's name on there. It'll say William Robinette, created by William Robinette, and those kind of things. So
dude, wasn't he the guy that got really screwed? One of these guys got screwed. Like,
I think he's one of the guys that did Adventure. But yeah, to kind of wrap that up, like as far as why is it what everyone remembers? I think you had the big business kind of coming out there, and sort of how this new commodity was being handled. Sort of created that atmosphere where you had this mass marketed home console that ultimately was incredibly successful. So that's why we remember it today and think of those things. And I think like an interesting segue is, like, say Activision was created out of that, which also, kind of put a focus on the game, like rather than the machine of sorts. And that kind of leads us, I think, to what some of the most popular games on this little 2600 were.
Yeah, when I think one of those the Fantastic Four, they called them within Atari there, and when they left, I think it was kind of spearheaded by David Crane. I wrote a little note here. It says, they went on to create Activision in 1979, October 1st it was, the first independent third-party team to develop video game cartridges for Atari. And I think, obviously they went on to do it for other consoles. This had never been seen before in video game licensing. This had never been seen before, and video game licensing dynamics were still being refined. Atari, as much as they hated to do so, went on to enter agreements with the newly formed Activision to develop games for them. It was a hard one to swallow for Atari, but the relationship brought much success with the games like Pitfall, River Raid, and many others. So that's, and yeah. I think when Activision got some of their venture funding, they were trying to get funding to form the company, because I think Crane and his boys were just like, what do we even do? Because again, it was a brand new, like they didn't really know that they could just be their own independent company, only making video games, not making consoles and video games.
Yeah.
So when they were getting funding, I think I don't remember the name of the company that gave them a bunch of dinero, bunch of money, but they actually included litigation fees within that funding, because they knew that Atari was going to, Warner Communications was going to get a little testy, little litigious.
Yeah.
We don't want you making games.
Go for that almighty dollar. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. It had to be a big risk, but I think they had, had some success already, and I'm super glad that they did it. And as we're having this conversation, like I'm I'm having this memory of seeing Activision like written out across my TV screen as I was playing this thing, and I feel like, you know, you could sense like the sort of excitement that these guys had for these games, and the love, like the labor of love that these things were for these developers, and it kind of started creating that gaming community that I think, yeah, it was a, you know, you saw that they put that in there for you, like you know, we talked. I mentioned that the Game Adventure has one of the first Easter eggs, and that
I thought,
you know,
isn't it the first? I think it's the first Easter egg.
I saw some articles that claimed but the other ones were more like, say, just like the guys at MIT, like on their big giant mainframe, you know, put a little something in there for each other. Like you could say it kind of was the same thing, but far as like widely known, you know, and to fulfill the role of what we consider an you know, modern Easter egg, yeah, I feel like it's definitely the first one. And I remember getting it. I went back and watched it, someone get it again, and I remember it just a tad bit different, but I do remember seeing it, you know, in there, and yeah, I think, you know, really interesting part of the story, and that, you know, this Activision was kind of born out of that. I know it's sold out, I think, at least once, you know, since then. So we're not, you know, technically the folks making Call of Duty aren't like these four guys or anything like that, you know. But it was an important moment, and I like that they came back together, and, you know, instead of just being spiteful or whatever, that, you know, kind of realized there's some money to be made here, and that, you know, typically in things like this, competition is a good thing. Like, you know,
exactly.
if you want to sell more games, make a better game, bro. Like, it's what it kind of says, you know.
I think the real setback for Atari was just the fact that Warner Communications was so used to the music industry. You know, I think they were just so set in their ways and so closed-minded about it that they weren't really willing to. And I can't blame them. I mean, you know, like if back then you're hired to make good choices for the shareholders. It's a business. You do what you know and what you're familiar with. But, you know, it was a clear example of them kind of not seeing the light, kind of not seeing the direction things were going. And in the beginning, it's hard not to be like, well, I get it, I forgive, you know, you can forgive that. But considering that the lifespan went all the way to 1992, it seems like there was a point there where it was all lost, you know, like they were too far down the rabbit hole, it seemed, to like turn things around perhaps, or, you know, or maybe they just never had the folks in there to turn it around.
Yeah,
because they, you know, as we know, and sorry for jumping on you again there, but and I know you're going to mention a few games here that completely changed the scene for Atari. There were a few years where Atari was killing it, so there were ups and downs. Absolutely,
and you know, as far as the motivations, like say you mentioned there, you can definitely understand why they did what they did, and you know, they're trying to make a square peg fit in a round hole as far as, you know, what they'd done with the music and entertainment industry there. And you know, I think like kind of how you mentioned earlier, like the engineers realized that the next console was probably needed to be worked on immediately, but I think they wanted the 2600 to last for years, and, you know, kind of be like a record player where you just continue to buy records and, you know, keep using that same machine. But you know, as we know now, like computing technology and chip size pretty much doubles every 24 months, and has since then. So, you know, if you're standing still, you're falling behind, and it's certainly interesting how the dollar kind of plays into that, and what might be a short-term win ultimately in the long run was sort of a loss, and you know, as I understand it, led to part of the video game crash of 1983. You know, a lot of their over consumption there. But yeah, why don't we talk a little bit about some of the games? Like what were the most popular games? I think it kind of tells a lot of the same story. As I understand it, Pac Man was the most sold game.
Yeah, which is funny because everywhere I've seen, man, people kind of hated that game when they ported it to the Atari. Like the arcade version was like amazing, super dope. I think we all have a good memory of what that looked like. And then when you look at the Atari version, it does look pretty bare bones. It looks like they didn't even really try.
Yeah. As I understand it, they even had like National Pac Man Day there on April 3rd, 1982 to help promote it as it was, being released on here. And it was certainly popular at the arcade. And, yeah, I found myself asking like why is Pac-Man so popular? Like what do I like about this game? And I've heard that the ghosts in Pac-Man were one of the first examples of AI in a video game and AI in general, I think. And I think that definitely pulls you in, and the little cutscenes I think are one of my favorite memories of like making it through those levels to see what was going to happen next in the cutscene.
Oh, sorry, it cut out a little bit there for me, Chuck. Sorry. What was the last thing you said?
Yeah. I was just saying that the cutscenes, like in between levels in Pac-Man, were one of my favorite parts of the game.
Wait, on the Atari?
No. At the arcade. Because it's on the Atari.
Man, I watched some video of the old Atari one, and it was choppy. Not well. It was unrefined. The NPCs would like flash a lot and stuff. Looked bad.
Yeah, one of the things that
the level design
that's kind of been going on in my life lately is I got this thing called the Super Console X Pro, which has a number of old systems on it, and allowed me to go back and play this game. And for our viewers, I did go play Pac-Man on the Atari 2600 again, and it is horrible. I definitely had it as a kid, and the thing is like if you're at any point in that screen where you need to turn into one of the parts of the maze that isn't in a corner, like it just won't do it. It goes by it like, and you're just like jamming down on the joystick trying to get it to go down in there, and it will not do it. And like some of the easiest things that you would think, like just the you don't realize, but there's a siren constantly going in the back of Pac-Man that's like like they didn't even get that in there. Like it's just kind of like without that. It's actually like it's actually too like there's a horn going of sorts. Like okay. I don't even know that I know. It's kind of in there for urgency, I think, to kind of make you feel like I got to get this, like kind of thing. And yeah, this missed on all those marks. And as I understand it, it was a classic example of that the guy that made this thing, he had like the prototype finished, and he showed it to these execs, and they were like, we got to get this out by Christmas. You're done, pal. Like, you're not, this isn't a rough draft. We're putting this one out. And it sold, ultimately 8 million copies. So yeah, as a CEO, they made a great decision, but
man, they just, the brass.
It also, we weren't believing those lies anymore on the back of that package. When you saw, the commercial or the package and the game was saying it was going to be just like the one at the arcade, and you remembered what happened, how that worked out for Pac-Man, I think you applied it to the next one. It's kind of like
yep. I can't help but think about the fact or that those details that we found in our research, that the brass just weren't really given the creators and developers and programmers kind of like the love that they
respect,
the respect, the creative space, the time. It was all about the dough. And when I read, in this awesome article that you shared, that back then, and you mentioned this already, but it was one programmer per game, man. These were works of love. Like, these were projects of love and art for these guys. They weren't just like, oh, I want to make this game for this big company so they can sell it and make tons of money. No, they were like Space Invaders, Adventure, Pitfall. One person working on these things. It's one person programming this game all the way through to finish, and then, you know, where today you got massive teams of developers, like in groups, like, you guys are working on this, you guys are working on that. Back then it was one dude,
and he wasn't in the engine either. Like,
he wasn't getting no love.
He was doing all of that, all the graphics, every bit of the music, everything was, you know, kind of being done from scratch. It wasn't like, you know, as I understand, like we were talking about that Unreal 5 engine, like I mean, I almost think
mind blowing.
You know, a couple thousand YouTube videos, I might be able to make a game in there.
Dude, like Space Invaders, huge landmark game for the Atari. I think that was released in '78. It says here that one of the victims of Space Invaders was its own programmer, Rick Moore. It says both Space Invaders and Maze Craze are widely regarded as some of the best programmed games of the VCS, which is the 2600, but they would be the only games Moore would ever create. As Space Invaders rocketed to success, it saved Atari and pretty much made the next 28 years of home video games possible. Moore himself was compensated with a mere $11,000 bonus. Disgusted by the industry, Moore left and never made another Atari VCS game again. That just bums me out, man. They made thousands of dollars on it. It says when Space Invaders was released for the VCS in early 1980, oh, excuse me, I was off by 2 years. It became an instant hit. Eventually, the game made Atari over $100 million. And they gave our boy 11,000.
Yeah.
Damn.
Yeah. Man. That is dirty, and I can't help but feel like they, you know, maybe they felt like say, you know, I forget what, you know, musical acts that Warner was representing, but let's just say they represented someone like Led Zeppelin or something like that, and, you know, maybe they felt like those folks got too much, and you know, they weren't going to let that happen in this industry, and you know, they weren't coming into this naive. They knew, you know, that could get out of hand, and these folks could hold them over a barrel, like for the sequel or something like that, and they didn't let that happen, man. They definitely you know, protected their own interest
and shot themselves in the foot.
Ultimately,
in retrospect.
You know, I think it's important that we mention Space Invaders here, though, because, you know, as you said there, it's sort of a game that took the industry from a novelty to sort of a global industry. And I heard it called something for the Atari that was kind of an interesting term for me, as a killer app. And when I first heard that, I thought that's like a bad thing. That's like a bug or a virus or something. But as you know, kind of looking through that, I think the term was actually used, you know, maybe even in the 90s at some point. But ultimately, it's something. It's a product. It's a game for a console that is so good that people buy the console just for that, like just so they can play Atari.
Man,
I mean, just so they can play Space Invaders.
Ladies and gentlemen, Chuck T's so serious here. He's like punching his mic.
Yeah, that was a killer app, man. Killer, dude.
Oh, so let me think. Killer. That's fascinating. I didn't know that was the terminology for that, but I'm not surprised that a terminology was created for that. What's the word I'm looking for? For that scenario where someone is like, I want to play that game so bad that I'm gonna just get whatever I need to play it.
Which, honestly, an example in my own life is I buy almost every console that Nintendo makes still to this day, so I can play Super Mario Brothers. You know, I've had plenty of fun otherwise on the Wii U and the Wii and all those things, but when I first bought them, it was so I could play the latest iteration of Super Mario.
I don't know why in the back of my brain, I'm thinking that we got back in the day, my little brother and I, we got the Nintendo 64 just because we wanted to play GoldenEye.
Yeah.
And that might just be my my brain like creating that because it seems familiar. But anyways, that's like GoldenEye would be a killer app in my opinion.
Yeah,
for the N64.
There was this game Sasquatch that kind of led me to this Apple Arcade thing on my phone, sort of similar. Like there are games that make you sign up for something, a service or something, that's going to continually take money out of your pocket, but you want that to be able to do that thing, and Space Invaders was that for the Atari 2600. As with all we've covered about bringing the arcade home, man, that was it. And it was a good game.
I think it became a killer app because of the success it had as a coin op.
Right, and the selling the fact that you can do that at home and it's not going to cost you any more quarters once you've paid, the price of admission here.
And I think I can tell you what the price of admission was. 1 second. What was the price of admission? How much were they selling that bad boy for? Okay. Let's see. Oh, it's not going to give me the info. Doesn't matter.
As far as the cartridge, I would say around $35, $30.
Back then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. I thought they'd have that information here, but they don't. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, I mean, Space Invaders. That's another thing. Like it almost goes right alongside Atari. Like when you ask me, what do you think of when you hear the word Atari? Like I could do that thought experiment with Space Invaders too. What's the first thing you think about when you hear Space Invaders? Retro gaming, Atari. Like I'll just start going into that same cycle. So Space Invaders is burned into my memory as the word Atari. So they definitely go hand in hand.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah. I certainly have good memories of that. And as it just kind of, we don't want to bore folks with every single game that was popular back then, but, kind of the games that made my top 5 list there were sort of Donkey Kong, Frogger, and Pitfall. And almost all of these are ports from the arcade, except for Pitfall. And
wasn't Pitfall an Activision game?
It was an Activision game.
Oh, man, dude. And I saw pictures of it and video. It looks dope, man.
Yeah.
It honestly surprised me how good it looks considering it's an Atari game.
And I went back and kind of asked myself, why did I like this? Why was it so popular? And I think even before Indiana Jones existed, it kind of had that vibe, like to me, like an Indiana Jones sort of mystery, we're, trying to get.
It's like Uncharted before Uncharted.
Yeah, and it had a good bit of variety, where in Donkey Kong you're kind of constantly jumping these barrels, and they sort of add a few things here with the hammer and the fireballs and whatnot, but. You were dealing with scorpions, like this jungle setting where you had alligators, you had holes that you could fall into. 1 minute you're swinging across a vine, and you were side-scrolling across multiple screens as well, where other games had pretty much stayed on one screen, and that was also kind of a big deal as far as.
I think Pitfall had I don't want to make up a number, but it had hundreds of screens.
It did.
I think so.
It did, and it had this timer that kind of kept the action intense. You had to kind of get on with things, and dude, Activision still puts Pitfall Easter eggs into games today. Call of Duty has levels and things like that. I saw 6 or 7 different examples of where they're putting Pitfall stuff in games.
That's dope. That's dope, man.
Yeah.
I want to play it. Yeah. I'm gonna get on that old emulator as soon as I buy that device you were talking about.
I kept getting on the vine and I couldn't figure out how to let go of the damn thing. Like I was swinging over alligators with my sack. And, man, I can't tell you too like how brutal that thing is. Like I would run to jump something and I would just fall in this hole and like you do that one like twice and you're done. Like you got 3 men, I think, when this thing starts and dude, I shot through those things in seconds. So yeah, it's
yeah, man,
it's tough and it's certainly, got to be looked at in its context. As far as how good it is compared to today's games.
And in Frogger's the one with the lily pads, right? You got to jump across the screen onto the lily pads and get the flies or something like that.
You got to cross like this road, and then you got to cross this stream, and then you got this little kind of froggy area, like where your frog, like little homes where your frogs go. And I want to say once they get up there, maybe they either get speeded up or you get an extra man. And very basic, and it's like, what the hell is this frog thinking to begin with? Like this looks like he's gonna die. Like he needs to get out of the road. Yeah, and like why? Yeah, what is he doing? But yeah, he became super popular. They eventually made this commercial, like where the frog was like. He was like this socialite, and everybody was visiting him at his house. And he was like, since Frogger came out, I've been really popular. And like, yeah, sorry, folks, I hit the mic there, but yeah. So, again, it brought the arcade home, though.
Yeah, and you didn't put these games in your list, but I want to ask about them / mention them. But it looks like the release of Space Invaders was in 1980. And then a lot of action was going on at that point. Activision formed in 79. Space Invaders released in 1980. Those were Space Invaders, of course, as we just mentioned, was a huge deal. Asteroids was released in 1981. That was also a big one. In 1982, we got the rebranding to Atari 2600. And in that same year, Pac Man was released, and so was E.T. Do we even want to open that can of worms?
It could be a whole show.
Maybe it should be.
Ultimately, but
maybe it should
largely, those two together are considered some of the worst video games ever made, as far as the Atari versions of them.
Indeed. 1983, something that you've touched on in many episodes, and I'm sure we'll touch on it a lot more. The video game crash, the North American video game crash of 1983. 1984, Atari gets sold again. But it gets sold this time to someone we've already talked about before. Jack Tramiel.
Commodore.
Our boy from Commodore. So he goes and buys Atari in 1984. And then, there's some... From that point on, it's just... I don't know. I didn't really investigate it too much. We get the release of the Atari 2600 Junior in 1986. Ovox is born in 1987. Great year. The final game from Atari, Kiox, was released in 1990. And ultimately in 1992, it was discontinued. Obviously, Ovox, me being born in 1987, has nothing to do with Atari, but I just thought I'd throw that in there.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah.
Perfect. That's the way I think of those three things.
Yeah, it's obviously in the timeline.
We probably could, just you being born and the Nintendo coming out in 1983, I think for me was the death of my Atari. I probably kept it. I think it stayed on the older TV, and then Nintendo went on the newer TV. And at some point, I think my mom pointed out, you ain't using that thing anymore. Can I get it out of the floor?
Oh, and hell, your Intellivision must have been in the bottom of a box in the garage somewhere by that point.
Yeah, well, the Intellivision was before the Nintendo, and,
Yep.
and then you had the Commodore 64 kind of in amongst all that. But to me, I think the Atari remained where it was at when the Intellivision and Commodore was out, but once the Nintendo was out, like I wasn't going back. And you didn't have that feeling like, oh man, this is going to be like worth something someday, or like I should save this because we'll be talking about retro games in 2022. Like you thought, this thing is a piece of crap. Like,
yeah. And even I think for us, the regular just consumers of video games, not the technical minds behind their creation, I think for just the basic public gamer public, I think and this includes me. I was, by the early 90s, I was gaming. I was a little kid, but I think in general, we all just thought that gaming was always just going to be like a side thing that never really became anything. It was just something that we'd eventually probably grow out of as a human, as we become professionals or start working, whatever the case may be. I don't think any of us really knew or could have imagined that it would become the massive, like, global industry that it's become today. I mean, even in the 90s, when with Nintendo and Sega and, these magazines coming out and, like, little tiny video game competitions and stuff like that, nobody thought it was going to become what it is today.
And I think if you did, like,
people thought we were crazy.
You were thought of as a nerd. Like,
no, we were thought of as nerds anyways, man.
Yeah, because you had those Revenge of the Nerds movies that were incredibly popular.
You ain't seeing no Biff playing video games, man.
No, and I was torn. I mean, I did play football and things like that, and honestly, I still feel just a tiny bit of that today, like of. Certain folks like maybe say folks that I worked for the Forest Service that never, knew this side of me, that I played games. Like I'd be a little self-conscious or shy about, really going into that with them. I wouldn't not, but it's a little like that, I understand that perspective that my dad had about it. Like it was a waste of time and just a fad. And
yeah,
hey, like some of those things.
That's fair.
Yeah. Yeah.
Back then, especially.
Yeah. And, that's still, kind of just a tad bit in my mind. But I think you're dead on. Like there was no, kind of as we were preparing for this, we were kind of talking about a little bit of, where the gaming culture of that time. And boy, I just didn't feel like it existed really. I think we were creating it as we went, like, as I mentioned, like kind of seeing those Easter eggs and those connections with these creators and you see the sort of camaraderie that it can kind of build, the friendly competition with your brother or sister or, your friend that's over for the weekend or whatever. It worked its way into our lives and is still there. And I'm super happy for that.
Hey, what's up with this other game you mentioned, Adventure?
Yeah, I as I hashed it down to my favorite games, and then I went and got on that Super Console X and played the games, like I narrowed it down to Pitfall and Adventure. And when I went back and played Adventure, it was tough. Like it
was it as tough as fighting a Giga or a Lightning Wyvern in the sky?
It's a lot like fighting a wyvern. He is a wyvern. Like there's 3 different wyverns in Adventure. There's a red dragon. They're 3 different colors, and I forget their names exactly. But they, you got a sword, like, which is pretty much like an arrow. Like as if you literally, like if I said, "Hey Ryan, can you draw me a stick arrow?"
Yeah, I think I saw that. Because I watched a bunch of gameplay for these games.
Yeah, if you take the greater than symbol and stuck a line, a horizontal line in it, like there's your sword, and you were a square. Your avatar was a square. Like that's all you are, is this square. And it picks things up, and kind of how you hold the sword is very important. As I saw it, I picked it up straight at first, and I was like, oh shit, I remember. Like you got to get it from the top and have it pointing backwards.
Yeah.
Like is the move.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, because the dragon's going to be chasing you. Like you think about, like, I'm going to charge this sucker, but more than likely he's faster than you, so you're going to kind of be moving around. And yeah, you know, it laid some groundworks, like sort of as, you know, sports and these things, like it kind of laid the groundwork for these fantasy sort of.
And the multi-screen.
Yeah, it did span multiple screens, and the dragon can actually move freely. Like it's not just that he's over here on the screen that was two back to your left. Like when you go back, he might be, you know, two screens up, which surprised me. I thought he was going to, you know, even from my memory, I didn't realize he did that. And
I think that was a huge programming innovation taking place there. Don't quote me on this, fellow gamers, but I don't remember his name, but the programmer that was doing Adventure. Do I have it here? Because I was just looking at that. Let's see. Bear with me. Here it is. Warren Robinette, who came to leave Atari because he wasn't getting the love. Surprising. Anyways, yes, so I think one of the innovations here was that we had single screen games, like single artwork, you know, where they'd have like the tank games or Missile Command or whatever, and it'd just be one screen. And then another innovation was the screen that would side scroll. Like your character would move from left to right, and the screen would move as you would move the character. But this type of game, and I think the first one very first game that did this was not Adventure. I think it was the Superman game, and Adventure came out just after. Which, side note, I think the Superman game was the very first video game licensed from a movie. A little bit of that marketing coming in there. See, that's why they had to hire that guy for the marketing, man. Anyways, so long story short, this was like the second game, I guess, that had this type of fluidity, where your character could move from into different rooms effectively within the game.
Absolutely, and I do think Superman, like as I went back and looked at it, like I feel like it probably is a little more interesting game. Although I did love this adventure game, but as I understand it, like there's like a gray area right there. Like when I saw that, I was like, no, it wasn't. Adventure was, and then I went back and looked into that, and as I understand it, Superman was actually written onto the adventure games code that William Robinette had written, and it got released first. So technically that is true that Superman was the first game, but it was written on Adventure's code. So
yeah, but it wasn't Adventure's code. It was just the code that he designed.
Right. Yeah. Because Adventure hadn't came out yet. You're right. So yeah, it is a bit of a gray area, but it you know, definitely both these games fall in that awesome area. And
didn't Adventure do like way better than Superman, even though it was way more bare bones? I think it did really well.
I would say so. It's definitely burned into my mind, dude. Like it was a challenge, and it had a lot of just innovativeness to it, and
this was a game that set the imagination wild, dude, because you're moving the little character just like you said, but at the same time going back to that super artsy like, you know, when you get the game packages and there's just brilliant eye candy art on each case that makes you think that you're about to embark on this adventure that looks just like it does on the case. You know, we had gotten used to recognizing that the game isn't necessarily going to look on like it does on the case, but it helps us to create a picture in our minds using our imagination when we're actually playing the game. So when I look at the adventure case and I see this dragon and I see a maze of in a royal garden, and then at the top of a hill there's a huge castle and there's a key and a lock, it aids me to use my imagination when actually playing the game. Is that kind of like what happened to you as a kid?
Absolutely. And honestly, dude, that goes on today even. Like,
yeah.
You know, there's moments that you get sucked in. Like, I want to term it as buy-in. But, you know, I know we don't want to kill folks with ARC information, but you saw it the other day. Like, I got sucked into ARC when that freaking crawdad or whatever it was just kept killing me.
You screamed.
Like I
Dude,
was
you were...
horrified. I am still horrified. Like I was standing out in front of our base the other day, and I was literally like looking over my shoulder, and like. I have like there are dinos in that game that are a million times more dangerous than that thing, but that thing was scaring the absolute crap out of me.
Dude, you screamed so loud, man. It literally.
Oh, I know.
I almost like
it wasn't even funny. Like after a while, like I think like you thought it was funny the first time I screamed,
like,
but like the second time you were like, why are you screaming like that? Like, dude, the second time you said you had let it away, and like I thought, man, it is so unreasonable for me to be scared right now. And then just out of nowhere, that fucker got me again.
Dude, that's already got you 3 times, man.
God almighty, dude. And I went back and looked, dude. They're not even split. Like, the closest spawn for them is, like, halfway across the map. Like, where the hell that thing came from? Like it was a water creature that was on land that just... Dude, I feel like someone was controlling it.
Somebody no one can do that. But dude, I mean, at the worst, someone dropped it there like on accident, or who knows. It was a glitch, man.
Good Lord. But yeah, you know, like I say, not to go too far down that road, but that scream, like it came, my parents probably heard that scream about these dragons sometimes. You would be going through these mazes and you would think the dragon was like somewhere else and he could travel across screens. So, you know, just out of nowhere there, that fucker was. And he was like, "Brrr," and he would swallow you and suck you down into his stomach. And one of the innovations of this. Yeah.
All this was happening in the game?
His stomach was a little square, like a little open square, and there you were. You're a square, and you fit perfectly in there. And I couldn't figure out how to do it on the emulator, but there's a way at that point to continue. You can either choose to be reincarnated, and everything stays like where you've moved it, or you can start the whole game over.
Oh, reincarnate.
You know, so if you've gone and got the black key and got it over by the black castle and all that already, like things, you can only carry one thing at a time. So it's kind of like, it takes a while to move things like where you want them. And so, yeah, it was one of the first examples of, you know, continue game of sorts.
Yeah.
So yeah, incredibly innovative game, I felt like. And also, like, this is not something that came from the arcade. This is a developed for the console success. And yeah, I think that's, you know, kind of why I wanted to talk about it and just my fun memories. But yeah, that buy-in, like, dude, like,
man.
I still cannot get over that.
Oh, that water creature came up behind you on Arc, Chuck T.
It was one shot me. It's like, it got me again. You were like, why are you screaming? I was like, because I'm terrified.
Oh, it's so funny.
Like, a lot of things went into that too. Like the fact that they make us, like, you can't not make it brighter when it's dark, you know? And so it was in the dark, and it just, God, he had my number, dude. Had my number. But yeah, that's fun. And that buy-in, like I say, you know, they hit it. Like the dragon, like, looks a lot like a seahorse or something. Like, it's not super great graphics, but man,
no, but you can see it. You can see like the where they were going with it, you know?
Yeah.
I think if I had to, man, there's a lot here, but if I had to wrap this episode up with something that really caught my attention in an endearing way, was the fact that back then, during these times, each one of these games was a passion project of one singular human, just putting it all into a video game, you know, and they were pumping these things out, it seemed like. And I just find that awesome. You know, the level of passion and dedication and creativeness, and I don't know. That's really the thing that caught me the most.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you know, we got a business that made some good choices, some bad choices. People left, people came in. Got sold here, got sold there. But I think that out of all of it, what really caught my intention was that they weren't these massive teams working on one game. It was just one person putting it all into a game, and there were a couple of hitters.
Yeah. And I think a lot of the play experience reflected that. Like, it kind of was a passion project, especially these games, like adventure games and fantasy games, to figure it out. You know, you had an instruction manual, but you didn't have YouTube videos or anything like that to go look at. And, it required some imagination and some buy-in and some sort of passion of your own to get good at it, especially if you wanted to succeed. You know, and beat the game.
Yep.
You kind of had to buy in there as well. So yeah, you know, I think for me it's really tied to good memories. When I think about this Atari 2600, like, you know, I think of sleepovers. Like, I think of like inviting my friends over, and I kind of remember in some of those Christmas Vacation movies, there's this one scene like where they're like, hey, you know, you want to stay? I think they're visiting or whatever. And he's like, I got asteroids. And the one kid's never heard of asteroids. So he's like, my dad had asteroids last year. He's like, he couldn't sit down at all.
Like, no, not that.
Yeah. But yeah, there was almost a popularity of sorts. Like, you know, it's kind of like, two friends ask you to spend the night for the weekend, and one guy's like, you know, hey, we're going to go to the lake, you know, with the family or whatever, and the other kid's like, hey, I got an Atari. I'm going to go with that Atari.
Man, that like,
and I never was that good at water skiing as a
it might
chubby
be cool
little kid.
It might be cool to have a short episode one of these days about that particular experience. That I'm sure it still happens today, but there was something special about back in the 80s, 90s. There was something real special about having a friend over or friends, or you staying at friends, you know, the classic sleepover, but where that sleepover entailed pizza, soda, video games. That's all. And sleeping bags.
And staying up late, you know, it's the weekend, so you can stay up past. Yeah, I think for me, it started out at 9, then it was 10. Like, I had a bedtime, you know, and that was out the window, man. And
I mean, Mom, can I stay the night at Rick's house, please? Please, Mom, come on. No, we got it. Mom, please, let me stay at Rick's. You know, doing like that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
or you know, can so and so stay over? You know, like, no, you got it. Please.
Oh yeah, and you know, again, like, I remember like my one friend, I would go and his mom would make us cheeseburgers and tater tots, and like
tater tots with ketchup.
Yes, of course. Yeah, it's just great memories. You know, and part of that, like, I think about the poor ergonomics, like how we were laying on the floor, and I think I still have a hump in my back where I've like sat with my neck like this for so long, like or whatever, and also realized like there were limited opportunities for entertainment back then. Like, what else were you gonna do? Like, you know, I mean, it's like my dad's like, you got to get outside. Like, I think I had a bike. I could go ride my bike. We played Army a bunch. You know, had some. It's like everything required a ton of imagination and things, like where this was sort of a jump starter for all of that. You know.
Yeah, I mean, it's like we were just saying. These programmers were using a combination of their own imagination and passion to deliver a play it at home, imagination vehicle itself. Like, here's this electronic thing that you can play at home, and it's going to just open up the doors to your own imagination. But if there's anything, and I think, and I may be going way too meta into this, but I think it's a good thought I'm going to use as my closing thought. But maybe, how do I word this? I feel like they were playing to that tune, like we're gonna create a product here that's going to help the kids, or the players open up their own imagination. Because if there's anything I remember as a little kid, I'm having a hard time putting this into words, but let me articulate it this way from a different angle. As a little kid, I remember always using my imagination a lot, but I always remember there being a limit to that imagination. Once you stop putting a lot of energy in your brain into creating this world or scenario in your mind, that ultimately that if you stop using that brain power to imagine that imagination thing, it's gone, right? Like to say it, like parents will say, "Oh, use your imagination." It's like, well, we were using our imaginations, but there's a limit to that. So I feel like maybe the gaming, I mean, not the brass, but the actual programmers were as they were once kids too, maybe they were in a very meta way saying, you know what? I remember being a kid and there being a limit to my imagination. So now we've got this new tech. Let's tickle that itch that we as kids felt and give them this tool to not have a limit to that imagination. I don't know if that made sense. That that was very long-winded, but I think these systems like Adventure on the Atari 2600, where my imagination maybe would come short playing something like this, there were no borders.
Yeah.
Like that missing element that I needed to fully explode my imagination was now there.
And permission to do so. I think like as I was growing up as a kid, I was always expected to be more mature. I had a sister, 5 years older than me. And we kind of accept that little kids are having these, imaginary friends and things like that. But as you get older, it's kind of frowned upon. Like when I tell people I've got an imaginary friend now, they're kind of like,
wait, what?
Don't listen to him, Steve.
Wait, what?
Exactly. You know what I mean? But like it kind of gives you permission to be a kid again. Like, cause when you pick up that controller, like you got to use your imagination.
Oh, dude, last night I was parkouring from roof to roof, chopping heads off zombies.
Zoom, yeah.
Zoom, motherfucker. Just kidding. I don't know where that came from.
No, I feel you. I keep thinking of this saying that's kind of like you get out of it what you put into it, and I think when you put yourself into that and kind of recognize like this vehicle that they've created for you, it is, the sky is the limit, and it is sort of permission to be a kid again and use your imagination, and I just think that's it's just one of the beautiful things about being a human being. And relating with other folks, it's like when you have this imaginary dream, it's really, sometimes when you share it, that's a huge vulnerability. People come in and are like, well, that's stupid. And like all of a sudden it just collapses like you described,
that's why gaming isn't for everyone, man.
Yeah. This is a shared, sort of dream. Like, you knew why, like you didn't completely understand why I was screaming, but you had a way better idea than most folks. Like
oh yeah,
the other night. Yeah. Cause it's kind of like an imaginary world that we subscribe to, together. And, that's just the beauty of these things. And, I got nothing but good memories. I think, some of the games let me down as far as the ports, coming over from the arcade, but I just accepted that. Like
some of the games let us down today, man.
Yeah.
I mean, I can think of a few games right now that I spent money on that, but hey, that's part of the fun. That's part of this whole gaming adventure that we're on. Do you got any final thoughts? Do you want to wrap up this episode, man, with your beloved Atari 2600?
Yeah, just, I think it's an important milestone out there, and hope folks enjoy kind of looking back into it, and we sort of inspire folks' imagination to go do a little research on their own, watch a little bit of the history of it, and you'll be glad you did, and for those of us that got to experience it, I hope it brought back some of those memories. I know you unlocked some memories for me there at the mall arcade. I had forgotten all about. Like,
my pleasure, baby.
Yeah.
See, I got to experience that, and now, I mean, hell, I think they're going to tear them all down in my hometown back in the U.S. I think it's going to get torn down soon, and they're going to build something else there, you know? So, and hell, that's an episode right there, dude. Mall arcades. Yeah. I mean, that right? Yeah. I mean, just in talking about the Atari 2600, I think we've come up with a couple of great episode ideas. And, stay tuned, fellow gamers, non-gamers, PvEers, PvPers, and even NPCs, because we will be back with another episode. And I think this is the perfect time to wrap this one up.
Yeah.
Nothing but love for the Atari 2600, respect and honors. It will always be a forefather of the gaming world. Anything else, Chuck T?
That's all I got. And hope everyone has a good couple weeks till our next episode comes out, and we'll see you there.
We will. Thank you for your time, Chuck T. I love you, man. And hey, let's. Do you want to do a little Warzone?
Yeah, man.
I love you, man. All right. Thanks, everyone. We love you, and we'll catch you in the next episode. Hasta pronto, way.